He really thought he could destroy my life with a web of lies and cheating. He thought I'd break. What he didn't know was that I was already 10 steps ahead of him, planning a comeback he would never see coming. This is the story of how I took my life back and served the ultimate revenge. If you're ready for a story about real justice, and you believe in the power of a comeback, do me a quick favor. Go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Your support means the world, and trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. To really get the depth of the betrayal, you have to understand the life he tried to burn to the ground. For 12 years, Mark and I were that couple. You know, the one our friends would point to as proof that true love was actually real. We met in college, just two idealistic kids with nothing but this shared dream of building a beautiful life. And for a long, long time, it felt like we did. We bought a small house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind with white picket fences and kids riding bikes down the street. We poured our hearts and every penny of our savings into it, painting walls, planting a garden, and turning a simple house into our home. Mark was a financial advisor, smart, charismatic, and he had a real knack for making people feel secure. I was a graphic designer, working from a small studio I'd set up in our spare bedroom. Our life wasn't flashy, but it was ours. And I thought it was built on a foundation of unbreakable trust. We talked about everything. Or at least, I thought we did. We'd plan the trips we were going to take when we retired. We'd debate the names of the kids we hoped to have. And we spent countless nights on our porch swing, just watching the stars and dreaming. He was my partner, my best friend, my entire world. He'd hold my face in his hands and tell me, "It's you and me against the world always." And I believed him. I wrapped myself up in that promise, never once imagining that the biggest threat to our world wasn't outside, but was sleeping right next to me. The life we built wasn't just a bunch of memories. It was how I saw my whole reality, and I clung to it with the kind of certainty that only someone who's never had their heart broken can have. The change was subtle at first, so small you could almost miss it. It started about a year before everything blew up. The late nights at the office got more and more frequent, and he always brushed them off as a big project or a demanding client. Dinners I'd made would get cold on the table while I waited, until I eventually just ate alone. When he'd finally get home, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine and a cologne he didn't wear, he'd just sigh and say how exhausted he was. Then came the secrecy with his phone. That thing used to lie around on the kitchen counter, but suddenly it was like an extension of his hand, always screened down, clutched tight, or hidden in his pocket. A call would come in, he'd glance at the screen, and I'd see his jaw tighten before he silenced it and said, "Just spam." If I walked into the room while he was texting, he'd angle his body away from me. It was like a reflex. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was being paranoid, just insecure. But my intuition, that nagging feeling deep in your gut, was screaming that something was wrong. So, I started asking questions, gently at first. "Who was that, honey? Is everything okay at work? You seem really stressed." His answers were a masterclass in gaslighting. "Why are you always so suspicious? Don't you trust me?" he'd ask, his voice dripping with fake hurt. He had this way of turning my concern into an accusation, my questions into some kind of flaw in my character. He made me feel like I was the one creating a problem, that my lack of faith was the real issue. He would look me dead in the eye, with the same look he gave me when he proposed, and say, "I would never, ever hurt you. You know that." And in those moments, I'd actually question my own sanity. He was so convincing, so calm, that I started to believe my own mind was betraying me. I'd end up apologizing, feeling guilty for doubting the man I loved, all while this small, terrified voice inside me just kept whispering, "Is it all a lie?" The night I found out the truth, it didn't whisper. It roared. It was a Tuesday, our anniversary. I'd cooked his favorite meal, a 3-course dinner that took me all afternoon. I bought a new dress, lit candles, put on the song from our first dance. I was trying to reclaim us, to fight back against that distance with some grand gesture of love. He was supposed to be home by 7. At 8, I texted him, "Everything okay?" No reply. At 9, I called. Straight to voicemail. By 10, the food was cold, the candles had burned down, and this cold, hard knot of dread was sitting in my stomach. He finally stumbled through the door just before midnight, looking a mess and reeking of alcohol. "Sorry, babe," he slurred. "Had to take a client out. It went long." He tossed his suit jacket on a chair and went to take a shower. That jacket was his undoing. As I picked it up to hang it, a small silver credit card fell out of the inside pocket. It wasn't one of ours. The name on it wasn't his. It was a woman's name. And under it, a company I'd never heard of. But that wasn't the worst part. Tucked in the same pocket was a hotel receipt, timestamped just 3 hours earlier. A hotel that wasn't for business. It was a sleazy little place on the edge of town known for hourly rates. My world didn't just tilt, it completely shattered. The floor felt like it had just dissolved from under me. I couldn't breathe. My hands started shaking so bad I couldn't stop them, and this weird numbness spread through me, like my body was trying to shut down to escape the pain. I walked like a zombie to his office. He always left his laptop on his desk, and in a moment of sick clarity, I remembered him muttering a password in his sleep one night. Her name. The name on the credit card. I typed it in. It worked. And there it was. Not just an affair. An entire second life. Emails planning their future together. A secret bank account I never knew about, funneling money from our joint savings into their new life. Pictures of them on trips he told me were business conferences. There were years of messages, and they weren't just about cheating. They showed this deep, nasty disrespect for me. They mocked my naivety. They laughed about how easy I was to fool. In one email, he called me his ball and chain, a necessary inconvenience until their plan was ready. The person I had built my entire life with didn't exist. He was a character, a performance. And I had been his most loyal, most foolish audience. The man I loved was a total stranger, and our whole life together was just a lie. For 2 days, I was just in a fog of shock and grief. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat in our silent house, with the ghost of our life mocking me from every corner. He acted like nothing was wrong, breezing in and out with a casual "love you, babe," that now felt like a punch to the gut. The part of me that was a wife was dying a slow, agonizing death. But on the third day, something else started to stir. The breaking point came as a phone call. I was staring at our joint bank account online, just watching the balance drop when his mother called. She'd always been polite to me, but cold. "Oh, honey," she started, her voice just dripping with fake sympathy. "Mark told me you've been a little emotional lately. You know how he worries. Just remember, men have needs. As long as he comes home to you, that's what matters." And in that moment, the grief just curdled into pure ice-cold rage. It was a fury so clear that it burned away all the tears and the numbness. They were all in on it. His lies were being protected, enabled, even excused by the people I thought were my family. They didn't see me as a person. I was just part of the scenery in Mark's perfect life. He wasn't just going to get away with this. They were encouraging him. That was it. I decided right then. I would not break. I would not be the tragic, discarded wife. The pain of being betrayed is a deep violation. It shatters your reality. But right then, I realized I had 2 choices. I could let this destroy me, or I could use the rubble of my old life to build something new. I was done being a victim in his story. I was about to become the architect of his downfall. The desire for revenge wasn't just about hurting him. It was about taking back my own power, about bringing some justice back into my world. I closed the laptop, my hands steady for the first time in days. The morning was over. The war had just begun. My transformation was immediate. The weeping woman was gone, replaced by a cold, methodical planner. My design studio, which used to be my happy place, became my war room. The first thing I did wasn't to confront him, but to educate myself. I spent hours in the middle of the night, while he slept right next to me, researching. I learned about forensic accounting, divorce laws in our state, and how to gather evidence that would actually hold up in court. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was an intelligence operative in my own home. My first move was to protect my money. I quietly opened a new bank account at a completely different bank. I started taking on freelance design projects under a different name, funneling every dollar I earned into that secret account. I documented every single transfer he made from our joint accounts to his secret one. I became an expert in spreadsheets, tracking dates, times, and amounts with chilling precision. Next, I needed proof you couldn't argue with, something more than a digital trail. I used some of my secret savings to hire a private investigator, a gruff ex-cop named Frank who looked at me with this mix of pity and respect. I gave him a name, a schedule, and a license plate number. Within a week, he handed me a thick manila envelope. Inside were crystal-clear photos of Mark and his mistress, not just having dinner, but kissing on the steps of the apartment he'd secretly leased for her. An apartment filled with furniture he bought with our money. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Frank's report uncovered something even more sinister. Mark wasn't just cheating on me. He was cheating his clients. He was running a small-scale Ponzi scheme, using new investors' money to pay off the old ones, all while skimming funds to pay for his lavish double life. He was a fraud in every single sense of the word. Living with him during this time was the hardest part. I had to play the role of the loving, slightly emotional wife he and his mother thought I was. I made him dinner. I'd ask about his day. I'd smile and nod. All while this volcanic rage was bubbling just under the surface. Every time he touched me, it felt like a violation. Every I love you felt like a poison dart. But I held it together. My plan wasn't for some messy, emotional fight. It was for a cold, calculated demolition. I was building a case, not just for a divorce, but for total justice. I wasn't just fighting for my half of our assets. I was fighting to expose him for the hollow man he really was. As my plan got closer to the end, the tension in our house became so thick you could feel it. My days were spent on secret calls with Frank and a shark of a divorce attorney I'd hired, a woman named Ms. Alvarez who specialized in complex financial dissolutions. My nights were spent lying next to the enemy, my body stiff from the effort of pretending to be asleep. There were some close calls that almost blew the whole thing up. One afternoon, Mark came home early, which almost never happened. I was on the phone with Ms. Alvarez, my desk covered in printed bank statements and the PI's reports. I heard the garage door open, and my heart shot into my throat. I shoved the papers into a drawer and cut the call short just as he walked in. "Who was that?" he asked, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Just a client with a last-minute panic," I said, my voice sounding surprisingly steady. "You know how they are." He stared at me for a long second. A second that felt like an eternity, before he just shrugged and walked away. I felt my knees go weak with relief. The real turning point came when I found out how deep his financial betrayal went. Through Frank, I learned that Mark had taken out a second mortgage on our home. The home we had poured our souls into, by forging my signature. The money wasn't for an investment. He had cashed it out to buy his mistress a new car and a bunch of designer handbags. He wasn't just stealing our future. He had stolen our past, using the very foundation of our life to pay for his lies. That's when I decided to escalate. This was bigger than cheating now. This was criminal fraud. Following Ms. Alvarez's advice, I put together a detailed, anonymous report and sent it to the state's Financial Regulatory Board. I packaged up copies of all the evidence, the secret bank accounts, the client complaints I'd found, the proof of his scheme, and sent it from a post office in another town. The last piece of the puzzle was his family. I knew they would circle the wagons around him and paint me as some crazy, vengeful ex. I had to neutralize them. So I scheduled a lunch with his sister, the one I had always been closest to. Over salads, I laid out a carefully edited version of the truth, focusing on his financial recklessness and how he was putting the family name at risk. I showed her just one piece of undeniable evidence, the forged mortgage document. Her face went completely white. I wasn't asking her to pick a side. I was just planting a seed of doubt that would stop her from being a soldier in his army. The walls were closing in, and he had no idea he was already trapped. The climax wasn't a shouting match in our living room. It was a perfectly staged piece of theater, and I was the director. I chose the date very carefully, his parents' 40th wedding anniversary. He had planned a huge party at their country club to celebrate family, legacy, and in his mind, his own success. It was the perfect stage. I played my part perfectly all day. I wore a beautiful dress, smiled at all the guests, and held his hand while his father gave a toast about the importance of integrity and family values. Mark was at the peak of his arrogance, just soaking it all in, thinking this was his perfect life. At 8 p.m., right as the main course was being served, it began. A man in a crisp suit walked in and quietly served Mark with divorce papers. Ms. Alvarez had timed it to the minute. The petition wasn't some standard filing, it was a 300-page document, a monument to his lies complete with exhibits. Exhibit A, the photos from the PI. Exhibit B, the bank statements. Exhibit C, a sworn statement from a handwriting expert about his forgery on the mortgage. As Mark was staring, stunned, at the papers in his hand, two more men walked into the room. They weren't lawyers. Their jackets had 3 letters stitched in gold, SEC. They walked right up to him and started speaking in low, serious tones. I watched all the color drain from his face. The anonymous tip had worked. He was officially under investigation. But the final act was all mine. I had arranged for one last gift to be delivered to his mistress, who I knew was at home waiting for his late-night call. It was a small box. Inside was the key to the apartment he leased for her and a simple note. The lease has been terminated. All possessions must be removed within 24 hours. Consider this your final payment. I stood up from the table. The room had gone quiet and confused. I looked at Mark, his entire world collapsing in real time. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I leaned in and whispered so only he could hear. It's you and me against the world, remember? You chose the world. Enjoy it. Then I turned around and walked out, leaving him in the ruins of the life he thought he had under control. I didn't look back once. The aftermath was a swift and brutal lesson in consequences. A prominent local financial advisor getting arrested at his parents' anniversary party became the talk of the town. His face, once smiling from the society pages, was now a grim mugshot on the local news. The SEC investigation froze all his assets, including those secret accounts. He was a king who had been publicly and spectacularly dethroned. His mistress, when she found out the lease was terminated and the money was gone, vanished within a few days. Her loyalty, it turned out, was tied directly to his bank account. He was left completely alone, abandoned by the woman he had burned his life down for. His family was fractured. His parents, humiliated and now tangled up in his financial schemes, had to sell their home to cover his legal fees. His sister, with that seed of doubt I had planted, refused to back his lies, which created a rift in the family that would never heal. He had burned every single bridge, not just with me, but with everyone who ever trusted him. The divorce wasn't a battle, it was a surrender. Faced with a mountain of evidence he couldn't deny, he had no choice but to agree to my terms. I got the house, free and clear, since the fraudulent mortgage would eventually be covered by his criminal restitution. I got my share of what was left of our real assets. But more importantly, I got my freedom. I'd occasionally hear things about him. That he took a plea bargain. That he was sentenced to 5 years in a minimum security prison. That he was just a shell of the charismatic man he used to be. There was a time when that news might have made me feel good. But by then I was already looking forward, not back. His suffering was never the goal. It was just a byproduct of justice. The real victory wasn't watching him fall, but in my own rise from the ashes. In the years since that night, my life has been a quiet, steady process of rebuilding. Not rebuilding the old life, but creating something brand new, on a foundation that is all my own. The house, which was once a monument to a lie, is now completely mine. I repainted the walls in colors that I chose, filled the rooms with art that I loved, and I turned his old office into a thriving new studio for my design business. The porch swing is gone, replaced by a comfortable chair where I sit by myself, watching the stars, and feeling perfectly happy in my own company. My business took off. The focus and determination I had used to plan his downfall, I now channeled into my work. I took on bigger clients, I won some awards, and I built a reputation for being both creative and resilient. I'm not just surviving. I'm thriving personally and professionally. Healing wasn't a straight line. It took therapy, a lot of self-reflection, and learning to trust my own judgment again. The biggest lesson was realizing that my worth was never tied to him. The revenge wasn't just about making him pay, It was about proving to myself that I could fight for myself. It was the ultimate act of self-love. I learned to listen to that nagging voice of intuition, to honor it as a protector, not something to be paranoid about. I don't think about him much anymore. His memory has faded from a raw wound to a faint scar, a reminder of a battle I fought and won. I've learned that true revenge isn't a quick moment of payback. It's building a life so full and happy that the person who hurt you becomes an irrelevant footnote in your much more interesting story. My life now is my ultimate comeback. It is my justice. And it is entirely, wonderfully my own. And that's the whole story. It's a reminder that sometimes, the end of one chapter is just the beginning of a much, much better one. Thank you for being here, and for letting me share my journey with you. Now I have to ask, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I really do read every single one. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more stories. Until next time, remember to trust your gut, and always fight for your own happy ending.